everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Physiology Secrets Podcast. I got Luke and Tyler here with me today, and we had quite a few questions over summer and over the last little while, given it's been so hot, around heat load stress, the effects of heat while we're training and performing, and we just want to cover off a few things given those questions, but then also a few experiences that Tyler's had throughout racing as well that are pretty invaluable in terms of understanding what it's like to go through some extreme heat load stress as well. So the first question we want to tick off is, I'll sort of hand it over to Luke for this one, but what's the process of heat load fatigue, or how does the heat actually impact us in performance, what might be going on internally in the body, and then how does that relate to an athlete fatiguing?
Yeah, cool. So normal core body temperature is about 36.5, 37.5 degrees. When we use aerobic metabolism, so just staying alive, we produce or generate heat as a byproduct. So we're always constantly producing heat. When we start to exercise, we're obviously increasing our muscle contractions, and that also leaves behind heat as a byproduct. So the body wants to remain in what's called homeostasis. So we want to keep it at 36.5, 37.5 degrees Celsius. And the way we regulate that is through sweating. So when our hypothalamus, when it senses that we are getting hot above that 37.5, we're going to start to sweat. All right, so sweating is evaporative cooling. As humans, we lose up to about 70% of our heat through evaporative sweating, through cooling. A dog, on the other hand, will pant. They can't sweat, so they pant, but we can sweat. So sweating will cool ourselves down. It's really important that we can do that, and then we need airflow to come over us as well to then make that sweat evaporate, which will release heat into the environment and cool the body down. As we'll go into shortly, obviously when it's a very humid day, we sweat, but we don't evaporate that sweat because the air itself is quite moist, so we don't become very effective at cooling ourselves down, and that's when we can get into a bit of strife with our heat load. In terms of internally what's happening when we sweat, so we lose all that sweat from blood plasma. So we've got about 45% of our blood is red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, all the good stuff, and the other 55%, so just over half, is blood plasma. It's essentially fluid and enzymes, and let's just call it water for the sake of it. It's not quite, it's got a few enzymes in it, but it's essentially water. So when we sweat, we lose that blood plasma. When we lose that blood plasma, we essentially lose blood volume overall, because if just over half our blood is water and we lose some of that, we're reducing our blood volume overall. So our blood becomes thicker. It has more stuff and less fluid. When it has more stuff and less fluid, it's a thicker substance, so it's harder to circulate around the heart. The heart has to work around the body. The heart has to work harder to actually push it out, and our stroke volume, which is how much blood per beat, actually goes down. So a lot of people looking at home, hot day, dehydrated, you're going to see that your heart rate is elevated, partly because your body is trying to cool itself down and sweat more, but also partly because we start to lose blood plasma and lose and increase the viscosity of our blood. So that's a little bit about what happens with heat load. So we generate it all the time. We sweat to cool the body down, which is good. If we don't replace it with fluid, drinks, so on and so forth, then we start to get into a bit of strife and move outside that optimal 36.5, 37.5 degrees Celsius.
And that's the typical thing we hear from a lot of athletes. Why is my heart rate higher when I'm running on a 35 degree day than normal? It's exactly that. Thicker blood, hard to move around the body. We're trying to help cool ourselves down, so heart's working overtime, really for that same exercise intensity. In terms of how it's going to eventually cause us to fatigue, and then probably lead into, Tyler, your experiences, but what is that, in extreme cases, you're out, we've got a lot of guys running marathons, if you go into a race in a hot climate, Ironman, whatever it may be, how is that excess heat, if we can't cool ourselves down effectively, then going to cause us to fatigue, have to slow down, impact performance?
Yeah, so there's a few variables that we consider. Make sure we link the Callum Hawkins example video below. Have a look at that, guys. That goes into detail. But again, it comes down to not being able to regulate our core body temperature. So if we go above that 37.5, we know we're in strife. So when we lose the blood plasma, our stroke volume goes down, heart rate goes up. Okay, so we're going to have a problem actually supplying oxygen because we now have less blood circulating. So that's going to be problem number one. The significant problem we have with dehydration is that when the body is starting to lose that plasma and we have thicker blood, the body doesn't want to be in strife, right? It doesn't want to struggle. So what it does is it comes to a point where we've lost so much blood plasma through sweating it out that our body is actually going to stop sweating. It's going to try to conserve the fluid, the plasma that we have left. So if we stop sweating, I just said before that we lose about 70% of our heat load through sweating, through evaporative cooling. if we stop sweating, our core body temperature is going to increase significantly. So then we get up to that 40, 41, 42 degrees. We get heat exhaustion and heat stress. This is where we can get some central fatigue. So central fatigue would be, I'll flip over to Tyler in a sec because he's experienced this, but this is when you see the people crawling over the finish line. They have not much coordination in the muscles. Sean Welsh is a good one for 1996 triathlon. Jonathan Brownlee happened to in the Mexico Olympic distance race.
Yeah, it was an ITU race. Yeah,
that was only a couple of years ago. So when your core body temperature increases so much, because you've stopped sweating, because you've already sweated out as much plasma as your body will let you do without being super dangerous, you're going to get central fatigue that way. Another sort of byproduct of that, so just before you get that central fatigue, if your stroke volume decreases heaps, you're going to have lower blood pressure. Okay, so blood pressure being the pressure of the blood on the arterial walls. Well, if you're only, say, ejecting 50% out as opposed to 100%, there's going to be a lot less pressure on your arterial walls. You're going to reduce your blood pressure, so you get dizzy, and you often fall over, which we've seen time and time again. You fall over first because you're dizzy before you then hit the next stage, which is that central fatigue, where you lose coordination.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things, but it's that sort of gradual process of one thing then sort of leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next.
Yep.
And this is where I want to bring you in, Tyler, on what does it feel like when you go through that process? You want to just go through one, or I think it was two races this has happened to previously?
Yeah.
Hasn't learnt.
Didn't learn, no. I think my issue really comes from the high humidity. Like I've had a reasonable race in Kona, I've had a good race in Busselton on a 36 degree day, challenged Melbourne a few years ago, it was sort of 40. Because I am a quite a heavy sweater, which, I guess can be helpful in keeping me cool in those conditions. I can replace it, but in those really humid conditions, I guess it's not necessarily cooling down effectively, and then my sweat rate goes up again. And Ironman Malaysia and then Ironman Taiwan, I didn't finish either of those ones, and I did a 70.3 at Cairns as well a few years ago, where I had a pretty poor race, similar type conditions, really humid. What does it feel like? Yeah, it's terrible. It's all those things you just said. Both at Taiwan and Malaysia, I think the point where I knew it was pretty bad was that stopping sweating, so it's stifling hot and you're running, and I've noticed my palms first. That was the one I really noticed, when you get really dry sort of palms, despite the fact. And in Malaysia, I remember trying to sit down and getting halfway down and then just falling. So that's that sort of uncoordination that you're talking about. And I just, again, I couldn't really, I probably made a better decision at Taiwan and didn't quite get to that point. I could sit myself down, and but Malaysia, went in an ambulance from somewhere out on the run course and into a medical tent, onto a drip, and sort of bring me back from there. But how does it feel? It's bad.
Yeah. The reason in Malaysia, correct me if I'm wrong a bit, the reason you got pulled off course was because your blood pressure was dangerously low. You remember that?
I was at an aid station, so I thought I'll sit down, and I fell.
Yeah. And
then the medical staff came over, and I sat for a while, and then decided I'd stand up and try to keep going, and that was when they said no at that point. So, I don't necessarily recall what happened, but we're in an ambulance, and I'm sure they did some tests. And
So obviously putting back on the IV drip there to try to get those blood plasma levels back up, so then we can then obviously get that blood pressure back up and return to a normal state. Obviously, you were spewing a lot, weren't you? Were you spewing when you took water in and that? Or not?
At Taiwan, I started 120 k's I think into the bike. I pulled over once and threw up, and then couldn't keep fluids down. So I guess there's a lot of alarm bells when it's super hot and humid, and you've got a marathon to run, and you can't keep fluid down, and you stop sweating and feel that way. That it's not really good.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous situation, because you're already dehydrated, and you can't actually rehydrate yourself with oral consumption when you're drinking, because you then start vomiting as well. So then you chuck in a saline solution as an IV drip, and that will rehydrate you that way. So there's a lot of things that go on there. It can be pretty. Well, I've never personally had it done, but I can imagine it's pretty bad. Yeah, pretty bad experience.
Yeah. Touched on a bit of there. More so, the humidity is what probably got you, and this is where probably I reckon a lot of guys would get not confused almost, but think, oh, it must be the heat that might be causing fatigue, as opposed to, you said you had some good races in 36 plus degree conditions, but it was the ones that had the really high humidity that caused that overall fatigue in the end and really made it worse than what you'd previously experienced. I'll open up to both of you. Why is it the humidity that potentially is making it worse?
Well, I would say that, as I said, I sweat quite highly, but when it's not the humidity and that evaporates, then that's effective at cooling me down, and I can replace that. But if you're sweating but not cooling down because it's not evaporating those humid conditions, so your body temperature is still up, so then you'll sweat more. Your body's natural response is going to be sweat more if you're still hot, and sweat more. So that sweat rate gets really high. I think in that situation I just was unable to match my losses with my intake, which pretty quickly led to that thick blood plasma, losing the blood plasma, thickening of the blood. So I think in those conditions for me, I just needed to slow down. Like, I'm producing too much heat at that rate. I'll probably race both those races like I was in Melbourne. They were good sort of intensities. I felt comfortable and then I'd be able to maintain, but my fluid loss was just far too great beyond what I could replenish. And that's when as we said, you lose the blood plasma, your blood thickens, your blood pressure goes down, and all of those things start to happen and happen and happen and happen.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about humidity, humidity is just air with water in it. So if you have more water, you can't change. So you've got sweat on you. You want that, which is a fluid or water. You want to evaporate that. You can't evaporate water by using more water. You're just keeping it as water, and that's what doesn't evaporate. So humidity is essentially air molecules with water attached to them. Is a really simply put way, which is why you sweat heaps, but you don't evaporate any of that sweat because it doesn't have the opportunity to, because you're just adding more and more water. So you need that dry airflow, the dry airflow to actually evaporate that sweat. So if you don't get that, as I said before, there goes your 70-odd% of your cooling capacity, and you just can't match fluid in, fluid out. It's no surprise why the guys and girls that do really well at the Malaysian Ironman and the marathon and Taiwan and they're generally, and again correct me wrong, but they're locals or in a similar sort of climate, and they've acclimatised to that specific environment. So it's partly genetics and partly training history, obviously, but it's very hard to come from Australia to then go over to that sort of to Taiwan, where it's very hot and humid, double negative, to then perform well. It's the same as Jonathan Brownlee going back and talking about the standard distance world champs in 2015, did we say? Whenever it was.
I think it was about that, yeah.
Again, hot and humid day, 35 plus degree day. Well, where's he from? He's from Great Britain. It's not very hot, not very humid over there. So all day they were pouring water on themselves, trying to cool down. This is both the Brownlee brothers. So they're doing everything right, but they're not used to that environment. And you can even go over and acclimatise for the recommended amount of time, but there's still a limited amount you can do, just given your genetics and your background overall.
Yeah, so based on that, you touched on acclimatisation. Is that your best bet in terms of trying to prevent some of these things? Go over early, get used to the conditions, or is there anything else you can do to try and prevent some of this from occurring? What are some strategies that guys might be able to use?
Yeah, I'll have a quick chat. We'll go acclimatisation, then I'll talk about cooling vests and stuff. Come back to that. So acclimatisation or acclimation is your best bet. So they're very similar. Acclimatisation is you physically go over to that place. So you would go over to Taiwan 2 weeks prior and exercise or train to get acclimatised, or acclimation, which is trying to replicate the environment at home. So you might go and turn on a steamy shower, you might actually go to a heat chamber, so on and so forth. Same thing, different name. So the recommended protocols for that, it varies, but you want to allow at least 14 days of actually training, at least 50% VO2 max. That's just basically a very low zone to even active recovery. Get out there for ideally an hour at least 2 times a week, might be 3, don't quote me. Actually training. So you can't just go over and just do your full taper necessarily, do nothing. You actually have to train. And the benefits of acclimatisation is that you increase your blood plasma. So that's the fluid we lose through sweating. If you get more of that, then it's going to take longer for you to actually be in that danger zone of having thick blood. So that's really good. But there are limitations, as I said, and you've done all those things before, haven't you, Tyler? Like, it's only so much that you can do.
Yeah, we got to Taiwan 2 weeks out, raced Xterra a week earlier, so yeah, I think what I needed to do was regardless of acclimatisation, was slow down, basically. Like, I think you'll all see winning times in these events, in these conditions, aren't as fast as they are.
Yeah, of course.
Because you just cannot maintain that same intensity, generating all that heat in those really hot, humid conditions. So, yeah, acclimatise to minimise your losses and get as best use as you can, but you need to make peace with the fact you're not going to do a PB in those conditions. It's going to be a different race, and I just didn't adjust like I should have.
Yeah, spot on. Like, if you reduce the intensity, there's less forceful muscle contractions, therefore less heat generated. So, of course, that's what you're going to need to do. Other methods around it, there's some things we can do. See, if we lose 70-odd% of our heat through evaporative cooling, well, there's other types of cooling that we can do as well. We're not going to detail, there's 3 other types, but long story short, your body will transfer heat to something that it touches. So if you pour some cold water on yourself, you're going to release heat that way. You can do some pre-cooling of ice vests. Probably not going to be that beneficial for an Ironman distance given the duration of the event, but you can put an ice vest on, keep your core body temperature low while not affecting your periphery, so your leg muscles and your arm muscles, for example. So you could still go out and be have prime muscle temperature and skin temperature to make your leg muscles perform maximally for a marathon, but you've kept your core body temperature low by having an ice vest. So that's something else that you can do as well. Obviously, you can't, I'm not sure what the regulations are, but you're not going to be able to use an ice vest throughout the full Ironman, but you can definitely pour drink bottles on yourself. They often hand out ice, put it in your cap, try to keep your body cool that way. You lose most of your heat from the ends of your body, so your hands, your head, and your feet. So a visor, even something as simple as a visor versus a cap, a visor is open, so you've got the head exposed. Having a beard is probably not ideal, things like that. You don't wear gloves at Kona, do you? But you do at like the Tokyo Marathon because it's freezing. You're trying to conserve you keep your heat inside your body. So there's things that you can do, but obviously keeping in mind the majority of it is evaporative cooling, and that's obviously inhibited. So you need to slow down to actually get less heat as a byproduct, whilst trying to maximise the other areas, just trying to get cold stuff on you without actually affecting the working muscles that are working there. So it's a few strategies you can do.
Yeah, so plenty to think about in terms of the heat load side of things, cooling yourself down. I think it's pretty relevant for the upcoming couple of months of racing, with particularly something like Cairns Ironman coming up. A lot of athletes come from Melbourne where it's starting to cool down, then going to go to a hot, humid climate and try and race one of these events. So pretty relevant in terms of understanding what's going on, understanding first-hand experience, what it feels like. So hopefully we can start to prevent a little bit of it. But again, it may not be a case of doing all the right things. It may just be a case of on the day accepting the fact you might have to slow down as well. So think about all the variables. Hope that gives you a bit to think about around heat load stress and how heat's going to impact your performance. Again, as always, if you've got any questions for us that you'd like answered, we have plenty on heat load. If there's anything else you'd like answered around your training performance, whatever it may be, please send those questions through on our Mets Mastermind page. We'll also link that down below. And a couple of other resources we talked about, like the Callum Hawkins video, we'll leave below in the notes as well. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of the Physiology Secrets Podcast, and we'll see you on the next one.